What if I told you there was a form of punishment so terrifying, so nightmarishly cruel, that it made other execution methods seem merciful by comparison? A method not just designed to kill, but to destroy a person from the inside out. While they were still fully conscious, they didn't die quickly. They deteriorated, helpless, decaying, trapped within their own bodies. For centuries, this method was one of history's darkest secrets, spoken only in hushed whispers. Its horrors, almost too gruesome to believe. But it was real. It didn't just punish, it unmade a person. This is the chilling, almost unbelievable story of Scaphism, the most disturbing punishment you've likely never heard of. And if you love uncovering history's darkest corners, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join me on this descent into the unthinkable. So, what actually is Scaphism? Imagine being locked inside a wooden coffin, but instead of being buried, it's left floating on the surface of a murky, stagnant pool. Your arms, legs, and head are left sticking out, exposed to the blistering sun. And then they begin feeding you, not out of kindness, but as part of the torture. Because what happens next is far, far worse than death. This nightmare was real. It was called Scaphism, or the boats, and it originated in the ancient Persian Empire. According to ancient accounts, it was one of the most horrifying execution methods ever devised. Victims didn't die in hours. They suffered for days, sometimes even weeks, before their bodies finally gave out. But how exactly did it work? To understand it, we need to look at the very word. The term Scaphism comes from the Greek word scapha, meaning boat or hollowed-out vessel. And that's already a clue to the horror, because this punishment involved sealing the condemned between two boats, or inside a hollowed log, and leaving them to rot alive. Though the name we use today is Greek, the method itself is believed to have been used by the Achaemenid Persians, one of the most powerful empires of the ancient world. But why would such a civilization, known for its grandeur and discipline, choose something this extreme? Because Scaphism wasn't just a punishment, it was a message, a declaration to all. Betray the empire, and your suffering will become legendary. The most famous account of Scaphism comes from the Greek historian Plutarch. In his biography of Artaxerxes II, he describes how a Persian soldier named Mithridates met his end, not with a blade, but with the boats. His crime? Not murder, not treason, but arrogance. In 401 BC, the Persian king Artaxerxes II was locked in a brutal conflict with his own brother, Cyrus the Younger, who sought to overthrow him. During the chaos of battle, Cyrus was killed, but no one knew for sure who had struck the fatal blow. Enter Mithridates. In a moment of pride, he boasted that he had slain the rebellious prince. A fatal mistake, because Artaxerxes had already claimed responsibility. For a mere soldier to take credit was not just disrespectful, it was an insult to the throne, an embarrassment the king could not allow to stand. And so, a punishment was chosen. Not a swift death, not even a painful one, but a fate so agonizing, so prolonged, that it would etch itself into the minds of all who heard of it. Scaphism. Plutarch recounts the details without mercy. Mithridates was sentenced to die by the boats. What followed was a descent into pure biological horror. Sealed between two wooden vessels, force-fed milk and honey until his body rebelled, then left to rot. As nature took over, day after day, he decomposed alive, eaten from within, consumed from without. His body broke, his mind shattered, and yet he didn't die quickly. 17 days. That's how long Plutarch claims he survived. 17 days of insects, disease, exposure, and decay, before his body finally gave in. And if that sounds like a myth, just wait, because what came next may be even more disturbing. To truly understand the nightmare that was Scaphism, we need to look at it not just as a punishment, but as a ritual of torment. Because every step was intentional, every detail designed to prolong suffering, to break the victim completely, physically, mentally, and spiritually. The victim was stripped of everything: their clothes, their dignity, their humanity. Naked and exposed, they were laid between two boats, or inside a hollowed-out tree trunk. One boat served as the base, the other as a lid. The torso was enclosed tightly, but the head, arms, and legs were left sticking out, fully exposed to the elements. There was no way to move, no way to escape. Once sealed in, the boat became a prison, and soon a tomb. At first, the condemned might still cling to hope. Maybe someone would show mercy. Maybe a sword would end it quickly. But no, that wasn't the purpose of Scaphism. Instead, the executioners returned with bowls of milk and honey, and they began to feed the victim. Not gently, forcefully. Mouths were pried open, throats choked down the sweet, sticky mixture. Not once, but again and again, until the victim's stomach bloated, until they could barely breathe. At first, this may have seemed merciful: food, drink, but it was a trap. You see, milk and honey in excess, especially under extreme heat, causes severe diarrhea, and with no way to move, no way to clean themselves, the victim was soon stewing in their own filth, their waste pooled beneath them, saturating the inside of the boat, a perfect environment for bacteria, fungus, and infection to bloom. And this was only the beginning. The next day, maybe even sooner, another ritual began. Executioners returned not just to feed, but to smear honey all over the victim's exposed skin. Their face, neck, arms, legs, every vulnerable surface was covered in a sticky, glistening layer. A beacon, a feast, and soon they came. Flies, ants, wasps, beetles, buzzing, crawling, biting, swarming over every inch of exposed flesh. At first, the bites might have seemed tolerable, but this wasn't about pain. It was about time. Flies laid eggs. Eggs hatched into maggots, and the maggots burrowed into the skin, into the eyes, into open sores and festering wounds. The body became a hive, a living carcass, devoured inch by inch, while the heart still beat. Infection spread. Flesh turned black. Wounds filled with pus and wriggling larvae. And still, the executioners returned. Every day, more milk, more honey, more suffering. Dehydration clawed at the victim. Their lips cracked, their tongues swelled. Their skin blistered under the brutal sun by day and froze in the cold night air. They shivered, they seized, they begged, but mercy never came. Only more feeding, only more honey, only more insects. Some victims were placed near swamps, where even worse horrors awaited. Mosquitoes, leeches, even rats drawn by the smell of rotting flesh would gnaw at fingers and toes. Sometimes they bit through the skin, while the victim was still alive. Can you imagine that? Feeling teeth chew through your flesh and not being able to move, to scream, to stop it? That was the terror of Scaphism. Days passed, sometimes weeks, until finally the body could endure no more. Death came not as a relief, but as the end of a nightmare that should never have existed. What remained was something no longer human, a corpse barely recognizable, ravaged by insects, blackened by decay, a monument to cruelty. And the most chilling part, people watched. Scaphism was often carried out in public, a spectacle of terror, a warning. Defy the king, and this will be your end. But here's the question that lingers long after the story ends. Was Scaphism real? Or was it a myth, twisted, exaggerated, passed down to shock and terrify? Because strangely, only one detailed account of Scaphism exists, and it comes from a single source: Plutarch, a Greek historian. According to him, Mithridates was sentenced by the Persian king Artaxerxes II and endured 17 days of suffering before death finally claimed him. But no Persian records mention Scaphism. Not in royal decrees, not in legal codes, not in their vast library of tablets and writings. Nothing. So was Plutarch telling the truth? Or was this propaganda? The Greeks and the Persians had a long, bitter rivalry. They clashed on the battlefield, in politics, and in culture. And Greek historians, like Plutarch, had a tendency to depict their Persian enemies as decadent, cruel, and inhuman. To the Greeks, Persia was not just powerful, it was alien, mysterious, dangerous. So is it possible that Scaphism was exaggerated or even invented simply to paint Persia as monstrous? Historians have debated this for years, and the truth is, we may never know for certain. But here's what's even more chilling. Even if Scaphism was partially fabricated, even if it was exaggerated for effect, it was possible. It could have happened. Everything about it, the construction, the biology, the cruelty, is logistically plausible, which means that somewhere, sometime, someone might have done it. And that idea, that the human mind could even conceive such a punishment, is disturbing enough on its own. Because Scaphism isn't just a story about death. It's a story about what people are capable of when power, fear, and revenge take control. Even though the Persian Empire may have long crumbled, the horror of Scaphism never truly disappeared. In fact, its echoes can be found throughout history, in literature, in drama, and in the twisted punishments of future civilizations. Because Scaphism wasn't just a method, it became an idea, a symbol, a warning. Take, for example, William Shakespeare. In The Winter's Tale, a character describes a punishment hauntingly similar: being flayed, covered in honey, and left for the insects to consume. Sound familiar? Even though it's a work of fiction, it proves something important. The concept of using nature, flies, rot, decay, to prolong agony has haunted the human imagination for centuries. Then, there's H. Rider Haggard's novel, The Ancient Allen. In this 19th century story, a character is sentenced to death by the boat, almost a direct retelling of Plutarch's account of Scaphism. Hundreds of years later, and still, the punishment lived on. Reimagined, retold, resurrected. And then, there's the Byzantine Empire. In the 12th century, a chronicler named Johannes Zonaras revisited the tale of Mithridates. He expanded on it, made it even more gruesome. Zonaras wasn't just a historian, he was an imperial officer. And his retelling of Scaphism wasn't just descriptive, it was theatrical, almost operatic in its horror. As if even centuries later, the idea still held power, still inspired fear. Because that was the real purpose of Scaphism. Not just to kill, but to warn. It wasn't just physical torture, it was psychological warfare. A punishment so drawn out, so revolting, that it could live on not just in the body, but in the minds of everyone who heard about it. Scaphism didn't need to happen often. It only needed to happen once, or even just be believed to have happened, to keep a kingdom in line, to keep fear alive. Even if the exact ritual of Scaphism faded into history, its core elements, slow death, insects, exposure, public spectacle, didn't disappear. In fact, they resurfaced again and again, across empires, across centuries, because the concept of letting nature do the killing of turning the human body into a living feast, proved hauntingly universal. Let's start with ancient Rome. The Romans perfected crucifixion, a punishment designed to prolong agony, to humiliate, and to break. Victims were stripped, beaten, nailed to wooden crosses, and left to suffer under the sun for hours, sometimes days. Sound familiar? Like Scaphism, crucifixion was a public display, a warning etched in agony. But there was one difference. In crucifixion, death was inevitable. In Scaphism, death was delayed by design. Then there's medieval Japan. Historical records describe prisoners tied to stakes in swamps or locked in bamboo cages and left to the mercy of the elements. The goal? Let the insects, the heat, the filth, and time do what a blade could not. There were even rumors of honey being used, coating the body to attract vermin, almost exactly like the Persian method. Coincidence? Maybe. But the cruelty is eerily familiar. And then, the 20th century, World War II. Japan's infamous Unit 731 conducted human experiments that crossed the boundaries of imagination. Victims were deliberately exposed to parasites. Wounds were left untreated, intentionally rotted. Insects were used to study how the body broke down under infection, decay, and infestation. The purpose? Not punishment, but science, twisted, dehumanizing science. Still, the echoes of Scaphism are unmistakable. It's as if once Scaphism entered human imagination, it never truly left. It simply evolved. Different names, different tools, same unrelenting horror. Because while history records countless execution methods, few are as psychologically devastating as Scaphism. It wasn't just about pain. It was about helplessness, about forcing a human being to witness their own decomposition, minute by minute, hour by hour, day after day, until nothing recognizable remained. Scaphism wasn't just an execution. It was a transformation of the human body into a warning, into a spectacle, into a slow-motion nightmare that blurred the line between man and corpse. And that's what made it different from every other punishment in history. Most executions are brutal, but they're fast, a blade, a rope, a bullet, and it's over. But Scaphism forced the victim to exist, long after they should have died. It stretched the moment of death into something days, even weeks long, until every breath, every second, every twitch of consciousness was torment. And perhaps the most disturbing part. Someone had to do this. Every day, someone had to return, to force feed, to smear honey, to monitor the rot, to keep the body alive, just enough to prolong the decay. It wasn't just execution, it was maintenance, a machine of suffering kept running by deliberate human hands. That's what makes Scaphism so unforgettable, so terrifying. It wasn't an accident of cruelty. It was engineered, a punishment designed not just to end a life, but to make sure that life ended as slowly, shamefully, and painfully as possible. So was it real? We may never know for sure. But in some ways, it doesn't matter. Because the very idea that the human mind could conceive such a punishment, that it could turn decay into theater and death into a message, is horrifying enough on its own. Scaphism isn't just a historical footnote. It's a mirror, a reflection of the darkness humanity is capable of when power, fear, and cruelty collide. If this story disturbed you, fascinated you, or made you question just how far people have gone in the name of justice and control, then you're exactly where you belong. Here on Histoeureka, we explore the past not to glorify it, but to confront it. There are more stories like this, worse ones, forgotten ones, waiting to be unearthed. So if you want to keep diving into history's hidden horrors, like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. because we're just getting started. And Scaphism, it's only one chapter in humanity's darkest book.